Good day. Welcome to the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation's Web Talk series, Exploring Zionism, Exposing Anti-Zionism. I'm Andrea Spindle, Executive Director of CAEF, and today I'm really delighted to have a young woman who actively, not just figuratively, does both and demonstrates what Jewish leadership for our future looks like today. Lauren Isaacs will present her ideas on Zionism today, new visions for Israel and the diaspora. Given what I already know of her knowledge about Zionism and Israel's history, her passion for Judaism and the land of Israel, her unbending frontal attack on Jew hatred, I think we're in for a great presentation and discussion. The Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation is small, but it's an established charitable organization that focuses on educating people about Israel, Jews, and Judaism, countering the lies and the bigotry of anti-Zionism and the low expectations of the anti-racist social justice movements that are trying to normalize anti-Semitism, not prevent or eliminate it. We need your support. We make every dime count. This organization is run by volunteers and our expenses are low, but we do need financial resources for advocacy, direct action, and education. You can contribute directly by going to our website, www.caef.ca, and clicking on the donate button, or by sending a check to our post box, the address of which is on our website. All of our webinars, bulletins, advocacy initiatives are shown on the website. Since last December, we have also been coordinating a grassroots movement for Jewish civil rights called End Jew Hatred, and we invite everyone listening to get involved. No one organization can meet the challenges alone. So find a way to join, get active, speak up, act up, and be part of the solution. Silence isn't an option. Someone who has been speaking up and acting from a young age, showing tremendous leadership, initiative, and plain chutzpah is our guest speaker, Lauren Isaacs. Lauren is a Canadian who made Aliyah at the age of 24, but not before she founded Herut's Zionism Club at York University and riled the anti-Semites on campus. She was a hero to many of us when, in November 2019, she hosted a group of IDF reservists to speak on campus, and they were swarmed by rabid Jew haters, requiring a police escort to help the attending audience, mostly Jews, to exit the building. The resulting actions by the university administration to this day are deemed unacceptable by many in the Jewish community. We are happy that Lauren is in Canada, though, living in Israel, and she travels between the two countries. She is the National Director for Herut Canada and Coordinator for World Herut while living in Israel. It's important to also point out that she's eager to work with groups that share the same values and goals, such as the Canadian Institute for Jewish Research, Canadians for Israel's Legal Rights, Jewish Resistance, Im-Chirtzu, and of course, CAEF. Less than a month ago, Lauren again demonstrated her courage and commitment to the Jewish world when she stood on top of the Temple Mount and unfurled an Israeli flag. No place on earth is as important to the Jewish people, so kudos to Lauren, who was subsequently arrested, and no doubt can tell us more about this unique experience. This webinar is being recorded. Please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A area on your Zoom screen, and I will take questions after her presentation, not from the chat box, but from the Q&A. So now welcome, Lauren.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It's a pleasure to be here. Can everyone hear me? Andrea, you can hear me?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. All right, it's so good to be here. My name is Lauren Isaacs, as Andrea so eloquently put it. I'm the National Director of Herut Canada, and I'm visiting in Canada, but I do live in Israel. And today I have a presentation for you guys. Let me screen share for you. All right, I can't wait to take all your questions. As you know, if anyone's ever attended any of my talks before, I very much like interaction. I very much like people to ask questions and to debate. If you agree or disagree with me, let's talk about it afterwards. So today, the topic is Zionism Today, New Visions for Israel and the Diaspora. Basically, being a Zionist. Let's be Zionists. So let's begin. These pictures are in Israel on the Temple Mount. I want to begin with what Andrea just described was the harrowing arrest. It wasn't so harrowing, but I did get arrested about 3 weeks ago on the Temple Mount in Israel because I did what you see in the picture on the left-hand side. I unfurled an Israeli flag on Har Bayit, on the Temple Mount. Now, this was the flag I held open, managed to hold it open for about 30 seconds before the cops got to me. And then they confiscated the flag and they arrested me. They said, come with us. You know, your time on Temple Mount is over. You are under arrest. And then we had to go to the police tent and we did all the paperwork and whatnot. And they gave me a good berating for a while. Basically, this is a problem. The problem is that a Jew in Israel, an Israeli citizen, opens an Israeli flag in the center of Jerusalem on the holiest place for Jews in Judaism. A lot of people think the holiest place is the Kotel, the Western Wall. It is actually not. The only reason the Kotel is a holy place for Jews is because it surrounds the Temple Mount, which is where the ancient Jewish temple stood. This is the holiest place for Jews. The fact that a Jew gets arrested for opening an Israeli flag in this situation is problematic. It should make your blood boil because it does mine. It makes me angry. It makes me sick to my stomach that this is the situation that we have to deal with right now. But practically, this whole talk is about being a practical Zionism. And this is practical Zionism, opening a flag everywhere and anywhere, being a proud Jew, being a proud Israeli. This is practical Zionism. I stand by what I did 100%, and I will answer any questions afterwards about these actions, about opening the flag or getting arrested. But I will tell you, I have zero regrets. And one of my consequences by the Israeli police is that I am currently banned from the Temple Mount. I cannot ascend. But when my ban is over, you bet your tuchus I'll do it again. So let's move on. Today, we're talking about what can you do outside of Israel to improve Zionism or to contribute towards Zionism or to perpetuate Zionism or, you know, to bring us to shine light on practical Zionism. There are so many things to do. Not everyone, unfortunately, not everyone is in Israel, right? Not all Jews, not all Zionists can be in Israel. And in Israel, there are different things you can do. Namely, I like to go up on the Temple Mount and display proud Zionism, proud Judaism. But if you're outside of Israel, you got to be able to do things as well, right? I mean, for 24 years, I lived in the diaspora. I lived in Canada, and I really, really tried to make every day a Zionism-filled day. So let's see what we can do here. All right, number one is educate yourself. And when I say educate yourself, there are a few categories where you should actually focus your education. I think it is crucial. It is fundamental that all Jews and all Zionists know the history of Israel, namely the legal rights of Israel, the legal rights of the Jewish people in Israel. These, you don't need to be, I always say, you don't need to be a walking encyclopedia. Thank God we have Google and we have smartphones. You can always look things up. You can always phone a friend, but you have to know certain fundamental things as a Zionist so that when you engage in dialogue, when you engage in public sectors, when you engage in teaching, in lawmaking, in the media, in anything, when you're having a Facebook fight with someone online, you are armed with some fundamental facts that are indisputable. Israel's legal rights. Now, we'll do this in 5 seconds, but I usually give an entire hour presentation on this topic alone. And actually, there are many authorities. I will tell you, Salomon ben Zimra's book about the Jewish people's rights to the land of Israel is a fantastic book. I recommend everyone read it. Basically, Balfour Declaration, San Remo Resolution, Mandate for Palestine, the Anglo-American Convention, and the establishment of the United Nations itself are the fundamental tenets giving Jews the legal rights to the state and the land of Israel. Of course, Jews own the land of Israel in many ways, in a multitude of ways. We own it legally, we own it morally and ethically, we own it militarily, we own it de facto, we own it divinely, biblically, religiously, but we also own it legally. And these are the rights that you need to understand when we're talking about legal rights. By the way, when people say Balfour Declaration wasn't a legal right, that's true. In 1917, the Balfour Declaration wasn't international law. It wasn't binding international law. However, in 1920, when it was adopted, the text of the Balfour Declaration was adopted at the San Remo Resolution, it did become binding international law. So too, subsequently, all these other laws and the founding of the United Nations itself, the very charter, Article 80 of the United Nations Charter, actually states that all these international resolutions are still valid and binding today. Up to today, that is in October of 2021, all of these are binding international laws, meaning Jews own the entirety of the land of Israel, and that includes actually what should have been modern day Jordan. That was included in the original mandate for Jewish territory. Doesn't matter. We legally own the whole land. You need to know this because people are going to challenge you. What is the most common accusation we hear in the diaspora? Israel is violating international law. Israel is illegal. Simply untrue. When I challenge people on this on university campuses, no one can ever give me a single international law, and yet I can cite 5. So you must know these. You must become familiar with them. This is our history. This is Jewish Israel history. Another way we can make Zionism real and we can be effective about it is to change the way we answer accusations about Israel. I am tired of the defensive strategy. I am tired of the weak, passive strategy. I am tired in justifying my right to exist, my right to freedom, my right to live as everybody else lives on this earth. We don't have to be weak. We don't have to be defensive. Answer in a proactive way. Instead of saying, when people say Israel's an apartheid state, right? People love that all the time. Instead of saying, no, but Israel is a democracy and Israel has a lot of Arabs in government and this and that. Why are we being so defensive? Instead, don't have the conversation on your terms. Don't have the conversation on their terms. You control the narrative. You know history. The good thing is we have facts, history, logic, stats, truth on our side. So let's use them. Let's use them. Let's direct the conversation to be what we want it to be. When we talk about these things, when people accuse Israel of things, I say no. Zionism is the single greatest human example of decolonization in the world. When people claim that Israel is a colonial state, obviously it's erroneous. It's a malicious lie that is based on nothing. So I say, in fact, Zionism is the greatest, most impressive example of decolonization in human history, and here's why. And then I go off speaking. I don't need to hear them. I don't need to let them attack me and justify why it's okay that we exist. No, you're wrong, and I can show you. No. You know what's amazing? That Zionism is a supremely moral Jewish civil rights movement. Let me tell you why. Let me tell you who it's benefiting. Let me tell you how amazing this is. Are you for social justice? Are you for human rights? Amazing. So is Zionism. Let's talk about it. So in the actual semantic way, words are very powerful, as we've seen by Israel's enemies over the years. Words are very powerful. We have to watch our words when we're speaking. And the way we answer, the way we talk, really can dictate a conversation. Are we coming off as defending? Are we coming off as weak? Are we coming off as, making excuses? Or are we coming off as right? Are we coming off as moral? Are we coming off as showcasing our history, our proud history, our facts, all this? So we have to be careful in the way we answer. Don't be defensive, okay? Number 3, know your history. Now, I talked about the history of the legal rights, but there are parts of history that you should know that not to do with the legal stuff, just with the history of the Jewish people. Just like, as Jews, we learn about Moses and Abraham and Isaac and all that stuff. We should learn about certain things as Zionists, the history of Zionism. There are basics we need to know. Basics are that in 1948, the British mandate ended, right? What was the British mandate, by the way? In two seconds, it was a babysitting job. The British were babysitting the Jewish homeland until the Jews were ready to self-determine and until we were ready to govern ourselves in our native indigenous homeland. And when the British mandate ended, we legally and sanctioned, we declared independence. And all the territory west of the Jordan River was designated as Jewish homeland. Again, before 1920, all of Jordan as well, east of the Jordan River, was also designated as Jewish homeland, but that got cut off in an appeasement effort to appease the Arab world much earlier. Anyway, we get to 1948, we declare independence, we reestablish the ancient Jewish homeland, and we're supposed to have all this legal territory west of the Jordan River. But at the same moment, 6 Arab armies illegally attacked Israel. Hopefully you know this, but if you don't, learn it, live it, love it, memorize it. You got to know this. These are foundational points in Judaism that you got to be well aware of. In 1948, so we were attacked illegally by these 6 Arab armies, and it wasn't only 6 Arab armies, it was multitudes of their allies around the Middle East and around the world as well, who sent troops in, who sent weapons and reinforcements to attack Israel with the intention of wiping the nascent state off the map, right? It wasn't with the intention of any 2-state solution. It wasn't with the intention of let's broker a peace deal. It was with the intention of destroying the Jewish homeland and killing all the Jews and taking the land completely. Now, at that time, unfortunately, Jordan illegally occupied Judea and Samaria, subsequently changing the name of the land to the West Bank. Again, language is very important. The enemies of Israel have always known this, hence why the moment Jordan illegally stole land, they changed the name of that land. Judea and Samaria is the heartland of the Jewish people, right? Jews come from Judea. Jews are indigenous to Judea. The moment that the Jordanians illegally stole parts of Judea and Samaria, they said, we don't want the name Judea associated with this place anymore. We're changing the name, and we're going to change it to the West Bank. Remember, the West Bank is on the east side of Israel. It's not on the west side of Israel. Why? Because it's the West Bank of the illegal occupiers named Jordan. Anyway, so eventually, we liberated during the Six-Day War in 1967, thank God. Israel reunified Jerusalem. We liberated Judea and Samaria. However, there's a big clause there that you need to know, which I think is a big blemish in our history, is that we did not extend Israeli law completely at that time into parts of Judea and Samaria and onto the Temple Mount. After we expelled the illegal occupying Jordanians, we allowed them to retain some semblance of administrative control. Why? Appeasement, to keep the peace, good faith. We wanted to show that we were in it for peace, whatever. Biggest mistake ever. I would argue that except for giving up Gaza, this was the greatest historical mistake Israel ever made. It's important to know this history because people are going to paint you into a corner. They're going to use words and conversational tactics. And as a practical Zionist, you've got to know how to talk about this. Here's something that's little known that people don't know. People don't cite often enough. Again, instead of being defensive and speaking on their terms, let's speak on our terms. This is fact. The Jordanian annexation, when they illegally took over at that time when they attacked Israel in 1948, was universally condemned. A lot of people don't know this, but all member states of the United Nations and all member states of the Arab League itself universally condemned Jordan coming across the Jordan River and attacking and annexing Israel. Now, except for Pakistan, which is not surprising, and except for Britain, who created the country of Jordan itself, no one recognized their occupation, their annexation, or their presence in Israel as legal, which is very amazing. Cite that. Talk about that. Let's talk about that, right? Why are we not having these conversations? Unfortunately, this is little known and very little taught. No one teaches this, but we have to talk about this. This is Zionism, knowing our history, knowing the facts, and being armed with these facts. That's all I can tell you. Education is the single most powerful weapon we have at our disposal. Let's use it, right? Anyway, when we liberated the Temple Mount, Jerusalem, when we reunified Jerusalem in 1967, when we liberated Judea and Samaria, Israel made this mistake of not extending Israeli law into certain parts of Judea and Samaria and not taking complete administrative control of the Temple Mount again. Again, biggest mistake ever. It's a huge embarrassment in the history of the Israeli government, I believe, but they did this. We can talk about that more after. You can ask more questions, but I want to move on to this. What we see, the day-to-day life in the diaspora, especially, I mean, I've been here 3 weeks in Canada visiting, and I've been on some university campuses, in high schools, and the rhetoric that we hear over and over and over again when discussing the Arab-Israeli conflict, the history of Israel, Zionism, is that there are these double standards that no one's calling out. These massive double standards that people just let slide. Don't do that. Shut them down immediately. When I hear a double standard, I don't move a step forward in the conversation until we backtrack and undo that double standard. We can't allow it. If you let this stuff to go unchecked, it counts as a point against us. It's rewriting history. It's history revisionism. It's unacceptable in every way. So, for example, a double standard that I like to talk about that we hear a lot that is not as challenged as I would like it to be is when people claim that the British had no right to hold the British mandate over Palestine. They had no right to be there at all. They never should have formed the borders of that country. People, of course, are arguing in this way in favor of the fact that they're saying the Palestinians were there first and the British shouldn't have stolen the land and given it to Israel, okay? Now, I'll agree with one aspect of that in that the British should never have been there. That's true. The British themselves were conquerors, foreign invaders, colonizers. They never should have been in Jewish Israel in the first place. However, they were, and they had the mandate power from the League of Nations, which is okay. We can discuss that. But if someone objects to the British mandate over Palestine, they must, if they're being intellectually honest, object to every other mandate power that existed at the time, before then, after then, throughout all time. Remember, while the British mandate created the borders of Israel and Jordan today, they also created the borders of Iraq and the Sudan. The French mandate over Syria and Lebanon. Does anyone ever challenge that? No, it's a double standard. It's hypocritical. It's anti-Semitic if we're only focusing on it to do with Israel. This is a major one that I don't like to let go unchecked. The fact is, there was an Italian mandate over Libya. No one talks about that. Does anyone talk about the illegitimacy of the existence of Libya or the problematic existence of Libya's borders? No. Why? Because it has nothing to do with the Jews. It has nothing to do with Israel. And therefore, it's all anti-Semitism. It's all double standards. Shut that down immediately in a conversation. Practical Zionism means doing something. It doesn't mean letting someone else take over the conversation. It doesn't mean letting someone else educate those around you with misinformation, misnomers, and lies. It means taking control of the conversation, taking control of the education. Whoops, number 4, and then number 4 again. Evidently, I didn't check that on the slideshow, but we're on number 4, number 2 now. Rationalize your own opinion. All right, this is super important. Before we get into big debates about the Arab-Israeli conflict, and before we start yelling and screaming and kind of losing our cool, we must be able to justify our arguments with logic and fact, not purely emotion. Because the moment we get too emotional, the moment we raise our voice, the moment we start looking a little bit crazy, we've lost the argument, we've lost the audience. Honestly, we might be embarrassing Zionism or Judaism as a whole. We really got to be careful about that. So an example of this is a question that I get. Why was not extending Israeli law on the Temple Mount and in Judea and Samaria a huge mistake? Now, I could answer that in a super emotional way, but I'm not going to. I am an Orthodox religious Jew, but I'm not going to answer that in that way as well either, because that's a logical fallacy. You can't cite to an authority. You can't cite to the Bible. So we should be very careful about that. Even if you're a religious person, we have to cite to logic. We have to cite to rationality. Why was it a huge mistake? Basic answer. A land is an expression of a nation's sovereignty. That's what I will tell people. And why was it a mistake practically? Well, it did 3 things, in my opinion, that are hugely problematic in the world today and are causing Jews major headaches. Number 1, it was a statement to the world that Israel does not wish to exercise sovereignty in its own land. That set a precedent that is a major problem, as we're seeing. We'll discuss that more, but the precedent is there. And unfortunately, that's it. It's taken as word. We don't believe we should exercise sovereignty in our own land, and that's a huge problem. Number 2, it began creating a de facto Palestinian state, which was never there beforehand, but our allowance, our passivity, our weakness has allowed another history, another narrative, another people to come in and start stealing our identity from the inside. This was a major mistake as well. And number 3, not exercising Israeli law, not extending Israeli law, honestly creates discrimination against Jews, legal discrimination against Jews. My arrest on the Temple Mount is case in point. The fact that the only people without freedom of religion in Israel are Jews on the Temple Mount. The only people without freedom of worship are Jews on the Temple Mount. The only people without freedom of movement are Jews in certain areas on the Temple Mount and in Judea and Samaria. All this stuff creates legal discrimination against Jews. So that's a way to answer something in a logical, fact-based way without getting emotional about it. We never want to get emotional. Like, obviously there's emotion, there's passion, you should feel it, but not in the way that you start screaming. That makes us look bad. All right, and I think, oh my God, this is the 3rd number 4. Goodness, why would you ever let me make a slideshow, Andrea? Anyway, this is the 3rd number 4. Apparently number 4 is very important. Do not be defensive, okay? This entire thing is, hopefully you're understanding, geared towards being active, proactive, proud. Not being defensive doesn't necessarily mean be aggressive, God forbid. It just means be proud, be smart, be strong, identify as a Zionist and live your life in that way. You don't need to defend your right to exist. No one defends their right to exist. So why should we? Another way, actually, for practical Zionism, what you guys can do, what we can all do in the diaspora to help, lobby the Israeli government. You can, there are ways, you can write, use your voice, you can be in the media, use your social medias. The government can make changes. I mean, the government put these rules into place in the first place, they can undo them, and lobbying has been effective in certain instances. I put an organization here named Regavim as an example. because they do something amazing. They're an organization that focuses on land rights in Judea and Samaria, and they do something amazing. They really lobby the Israeli government. They work a lot with the Supreme Court, I should say, against the Supreme Court in Israel to give Jews rights, to ensure that there's no illegal Arab construction stealing Jewish land, that there's no illegal Arab planting in Jewish fields. They do a lot of stuff. These are the organizations you should be supporting. You should be raising your voice. Every single person has a voice. It only takes one. You know, people say, I'm never going to make a difference. What's the point of me saying something? You never know. Every person in history who ever stood up and made a change was one person initially. It was one person who did something, who said, I'm not going to stand for the status quo anymore. I want to make a change. So use your voice. If you're a good writer, use your writing skills. Write letters, write op-eds, write to the government, write to the Israeli MKs, the members of Knesset. Go on the media, write posts on social media. Do what you can and support these organizations. There are more organizations that you should support as well. But before that, I just want to show you something absolutely mind-blowing, something that the first time I learned about it, I was rendered speechless, all right? Which laws currently govern Judea and Samaria? I can tell you before we get into this, that the laws that currently govern the Temple Mount are Jordanian law and Israel military orders. Those are the two laws that govern the Temple Mount, hence why I was arrested when I opened an Israeli flag 2 weeks ago. Which laws govern Judea and Samaria currently? Well, it's a mess. There are actually 4 different kinds of laws, mainly that govern Judea and Samaria. There are vestiges of Ottoman land law that governs Judea and Samaria. It's unbelievable because the Ottoman Empire doesn't even exist anymore. There's British mandatory law, which is still there. Again, the Brits were babysitters in a region that didn't belong to them. So why is there a law? Why was it ever enforced and why is it still enforced today? It's beyond me. Jordanian law, again, they were the illegal occupiers that extended their law that Israel kind of allowed them to do, and Israel military orders. This is what governs Judea and Samaria. I have a lot of friends who live in Judea and Samaria, and it's a balagan for them. It's a mess because they have all these laws that are instituted and followed by the Israeli Supreme Court. It's ridiculous. I'll show you an example of how this creates problems and discrimination against Jews. It's just mind-blowing. All right. Here are 2 absolutely shocking examples that we need to understand. We need to see as Zionists, if we call ourselves Zionists, this needs to make us do something. This needs to galvanize us. Number 1, this document you're looking at here is a real Jordanian law, which has been adopted by the Israeli Supreme Court. Unfortunately, there's no English translation. It's only in Hebrew, but it's a Jordanian law that is enforced in Judea and Samaria today. It states that it is illegal to sell land or to give any property rights in Judea and Samaria to non-Arabs. Why? Because Jordan has Judean legal laws. They have Jew-free laws, right? Jordan is a Jew-free country. No Jews live there. Jews aren't allowed to buy land there. Jews aren't allowed to buy or rent property in Jordan. So when Jordan illegally occupied and they moved into Israeli territory, they brought their Judean laws with them. And when Israel chose not to extend Israeli law, these laws filled in the gap. They filled in like a vacuum, and they are still in force today. So private Jewish individuals cannot buy land in Judea and Samaria. Now, there are ways around it. Obviously, we understand that Jews do own property in Judea and Samaria. How? Well, there are loopholes. There are organizations and corporations set up through different people, through different organizations in order to kind of loopholishly buy land for Jews. But an individual, if I alone went into Judea and Samaria now and found a barren piece of land that I wanted to buy, state land, I wouldn't be allowed to under this Jordanian law. It's unbelievable that this is still in force in 2021 in the Jewish country of Israel. The second example is even more shocking. This is Ottoman land law, Article 78. You can look this up. It's available online. Again, most of it is in Hebrew, but you can get it translated if you don't speak Hebrew. Unfortunately, this land law has cost the state of Israel hundreds of thousands of dunams of land in the past decade alone. Now, it states that if you use a piece of land for a certain amount of time, the Ottoman Sultan can give you land rights, basically ownership of that land. Why was this in practice at all? It was because at the time when the Supreme Sultan, the supreme leader of the world, basically, of the Ottoman Empire, he owned all this land. He wanted to encourage growth. He wanted to encourage cultivation, and he wanted his economy to flourish in the Ottoman Empire. So if people were working his land, he said, work the land and basically you can own it. No title deeds, no papers, nothing. Just work it and you own it. Okay, This was a law during Ottoman times. Now, this law itself was actually abandoned still during Ottoman times. It was abandoned when the Ottoman Empire still existed, and it is not enforced anywhere in the entire world except for in one location. It is enforced in Judea and Samaria today, and it affects Jews and Jews only. Meaning, if an Arab man wants to take over, and I say Arab man because under Ottoman land law, it is derived from Sharia law, so women don't have property rights under these laws, only men. So if an Arab man decides he wants to take over a piece of land in Judea and Samaria, in Israel, all he has to do is plant something on it. If he plants something on it, it is no longer state land. Now, it doesn't mean that it is now Arab land, but it does mean that it is no longer considered Israel state land. This is under the principles called ibud bechazak, which means cultivation and possession. You don't have to worry about all the legal jargon and the what's going on in the background, but basically, this is an abomination. The fact that this law exists and it is enforced. You think I'm joking that it's enforced? In 2012, the Supreme Court of the State of Israel ruled that Article 78 of Ottoman land law can only grant agricultural rights to Arabs. It can only benefit Arabs. Because I know what a lot of you are thinking. Hopefully the first thing I thought when I heard about this law is that let's get a team of Zionists together. We're going to go out into the fields of Judea and Samaria right now. We're going to take advantage of this law and we're going to plant the hell out of this land and cultivate it all and ensure that there are no challenges to Jewish rights. It doesn't work like that. This law is designed only to benefit the Arabs. If a Jew goes out and plants, the planting will be uprooted and the Jew will be brought before the Supreme Court. This is not a joke. You can look this up. This is available. This is public court records in Israel as well. Look it up. It's unbelievable that this legal discrimination exists. And what is it all from? It's all from passivity. It's all from weakness. It's all from decisions to try and defend our right to exist instead of enforcing our right to exist. It's saying, please like us, please accept us, we'll do whatever you want, we'll appease you. And look at the damage it's done. Look at the damage it's done to the Jewish state and the Jewish people. Appeasement never works. We're finally on number 6. Oh my God, we had number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, and now we've entered number 6. Okay, so I will say that another thing you have to do in the diaspora is get involved with amazing organizations that are doing the hard work, that are doing the Zionism on the ground. There are so many organizations that fill different niches and they do different things. Obviously, I'm biased with Herut Canada as I run it, but Andrea's amazing organization, CAEF, CIJR, CILR, and Jew Hatred Canada, Im Tirtzu, Regavim, and there are dozens more that are amazing, practical organizations that are active Zionist organizations. Now, I really prefer the organizations that do something, that walk the walk instead of just talking the talk. I will say there are some major Jewish organizations that I would tell you not to support, that I think do nothing, that they exist in name only. They do not give practical support, help, empowerment, education to their Jewish people. They do not help students on campuses, but these organizations, and if you write to me afterwards, I can give you other good ones, these do. These are the organizations that you really want to support. Be active. You can do so many things. Join as a member, sign up for everyone's newsletters. All of us send out amazing newsletters. We send out programming. I can't speak for the other organizations, but I know Herut Canada, we send out information, educational material. Some of the stuff that I'm talking about now, we'll send you so you can learn, so you can teach others. Donate money. I know it sounds, like an embarrassing push when you tell people to donate, but as Andrea said at the beginning, all of these organizations, if I'm not mistaken, they're charities, they're nonprofits. We function on very low budgets. Most of our people are volunteers. We want to do the Zionism, so help us in any way that you can. And if you're not ready to become an active member, feet on the ground, so you can do other things, sign up for newsletters, give us money. There are plenty of ways to get involved. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. That's the website for Herut Canada. You can find me on that website or online. I will thank Andrea, and I hope we can engage with dialogue and any questions now. Andrea, thank you so much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Lauren. Amazing, fantastic. We really appreciate it. And already many questions have been forwarded, and I've been writing them down as they've come in so I can jump right in. So first of all, I just want to reiterate what Lauren said about be active, don't be silent, donate, get involved. We certainly want that. And the organizations that were listed are mostly Canadian, 2 are Israeli. There was a question about American organizations, and we can provide that also. And Herut does operate in the US. So Herut North America, Herut Canada, Herut World, they're there for you. So a couple of questions. First, simple question, I think, cannot have an easy answer. Why does Israel continue not to allow Jewish prayer rather than change the status quo and renegotiate or cancel, revoke whatever they gave to Jordan?
Excellent question. And it is a question that bothers me every day of my life, hence why I ignore it. I go up there and I pray anyway, and I wave the flag, and I know people who do as well in moments of resistance, in moments of peaceful protest. They should change it, but the Israeli government is afraid. They're afraid. It's an appeasing attitude. We've always been an appeasing people, unfortunately, right? Because we're peaceful people. When you hear about the greatest conquerors ever in the world, who've done the most strong, effective, violent conquests? Well, you've got the Christians who did it, the Crusaders, you've got the Muslims who basically took over half the world. A lot of people may come to mind. The Jews don't come to mind. Thank God. Because we're not that kind of people. We're not the kind of people who go around slaughtering people. We don't use strength and physical prowess when we don't need to. We're a peaceful people. We're a defensive people. And while that is great in certain aspects, in other aspects, it's to the detriment of ourselves, it's to the detriment of our self-determination, it's to the detriment of our freedom. The fact that Israel appeases so much the Arab world, they don't want to allow Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount because it may start a war with the Arab world. It may offend people. It may upset people. To me, that boggles my mind, and it's unacceptable. Believe you me, if I were the Prime Minister of Israel, that would be the first law to be changed. However, we've got a government right now that doesn't believe that we should change that we should necessarily incite anything. Of course, I don't believe it's incitement to allow freedom of religion, freedom of worship, but some people in the Israeli government say they do. Now, I just want to be clear, when I, crap all over the Israeli government, it has nothing to do with my Zionism. And I understand my Zionism, my Judaism, my connection to the land of Israel. It transcends the current Israeli government. We are not the current Israeli government. Whether you love them or you hate them, honestly, it doesn't matter. They're temporary. Besides, Israel has a new election like every 5 minutes, right? So it's temporary. And Zionism is so much bigger. It's so much deeper than the current Israeli government. So I'm not too worried about the Israeli government's actions. I disagree with some of them. I know they're wrong. I don't agree with the appeasing ones and the weak ones. And whoever asked that question, I wholeheartedly agree with them. I wish the Israeli government would strap on a pair and change that law.
Well, we know that. I agree with you. There's too much passivity. I say too much positivity and passivity rather than challenging what is. And what I also want to share, you've been part of a conversation we've had with End Jew Hatred globally about organizing more people to go up on the Temple Mount. So if any of our listeners are going to be in Israel and would participate with you and with others like Brooke Goldstein, I want to encourage them to do so, right? Take a 100%. Picture, go up, and definitely pray, open a flag, take your chances, and make it happen.
Listen, I just want to say with regard to that, we've gotten a lot of flack. Obviously, I've gotten a lot of hate mail, especially from Jews who said it was inciting, it was provocative, right. It was inflammatory. Yeah, they love to use the word provocative, and first of all, what is a provocation? It's an offense, right? I've offended someone. I've provoked someone, meaning I've offended their sensibilities. What I say to that is, I don't care. And not to be disrespectful, but everyone gets offended at everything. To be honest, almost the entire Arab world is provoked by the mere existence of Israel as a Jewish country. So we don't lie down and die. We don't give up on what's right and what's moral. You do what's correct, even if it's going to offend some people, because that's how you affect positive change. So for those saying it was a provocation, I sincerely disagree. And also, if you're offended, I feel bad for you. Like, that's okay to be offended. It doesn't mean what I'm doing is wrong. It means you can be offended and we can approach a situation in two different ways.
I believe the Supreme Court is part of the problem. Am I not right? That if a case is brought, they would argue that the government can't change the law.
100%. The Supreme Court passes rules all the time, actually, that are really harmful to the Jewish people and the Jewish freedom in the land of Israel. Again, it's all appeasement.
Right. Okay, I'll move on. Obviously, a lot of people are interested in what students can do. So what action would you suggest for students who want to stand up to really what they call pro-Palestinian, but essentially anti-Israel demonstrations? How can a Jewish student face that?
Very good. Very good. Thank you for differentiating there. Exactly. Most, I would say 99.999% of the clubs on campus that purport to be pro-Palestinian are actually simply just anti-Semitic clubs hiding behind another name, another term, right? So what students can do is join clubs, join Israel clubs, be proactive, make a presence, make a loud presence, get your friends to join clubs on university campuses. And if there are no clubs, start clubs yourself. File and open clubs. Be a Zionist on campus. If you don't like the Jewish clubs in existence or the Israel clubs in existence, start your own one. Reach out to us. Reach out to me personally. I try to answer all my messages, especially from university students who need help. And I will personally come to your campus and stand with you, holding a flag, handing out information, speaking to people and educating. We have to have a physical presence. Raise your voice. Don't be afraid to wear your Magen David. Don't be afraid to wear your kippah. Be a loud and proud Jew. Wave that Israel flag, and anyone who challenges you on it, be armed with facts, be armed with knowledge, be armed with education, and be armed with my phone number in case you need to phone a friend and get help quickly. But also your organization, Andrea. As I said, there are so many organizations to get involved with. The ones on campus are not necessarily sufficient in enhancing Israel pride, enhancing Zionism. So start a club yourself, get involved, come to our seminars and learn. That's what I would say. Just do something. Don't sit back and wish it all changes. Do something.
Okay, what's the connection then between Herut and the Likud or any other political party? Is there a connection?
So initially, when we began back in 1999, when the organization was founded, it was broken off from the original Likud party in the Israeli government. Today, it is not. We are completely apolitical. And I know that sounds funny because everyone politicizes Zionism 100% anyway. So you'll say it's a Zionist thing anyway. It's a political thing anyway. But we are not a political organization. We aren't affiliated. We're bipartisan. We're just an educational charity now. The word Herut in Hebrew means freedom. And we honestly believe in freedom for everyone. And it's just an educational charity. We do follow the principles of Jabotinsky Zionism, which was being a strong Jew, being an active Jew, working the land, doing different things. So it started as a political organization. It is not anymore.
Okay, would the annexation of parts of Judea and Samaria, which was proposed at one point, would that in some way change seriously given these different levels of law? I mean, how would you, with 4 different, as you said, vestiges of the law, would annexation suddenly change what laws applied, number one? And now that Gantz has allowed more growth and development by Arabs, how will that affect the administration of the land?
Okay, so excellent question. Number one, you cannot annex the land. You cannot annex something that you already own. So let's be clear about this. When we talk about the issue of extending Israeli law, this is just an important semantically to discuss. We should never use the word annexation because Israel legally owns all the land. It always has. There's never been another sovereign in that land. There's never been another empire with sovereignty in that land other than the Jewish people, the ancient Israelites. You cannot annex something you own. Again, we own it legally, not to mention we own it biblically, we own it militarily, we own it in every way. So we cannot annex something we already own. With regard to extending Israeli law, should we? Absolutely. I mean, why would you have a country, a sovereign, free country where your law doesn't apply to every square inch of that country? Of course, we should extend Israeli law. What will it change practically? Well, if we extended Israeli law and brought it under the principles that the rest of Israel is governed under, you know, the rest of Tel Aviv is governed under, the rest of Haifa, it would get rid of the ridiculous vestiges of Ottoman law, British law. All that should be gone. That law should never have been there in the first place. Again, it was illegal occupiers law. It never should have been there. And when we reestablished national statehood, it should have been all Israeli law, pure Israeli law. It should have been one uniform governance over the entire country. Of course, it will change that landscape. And what will happen? Probably it will spark World War III. Probably it will spark another intifada if we suddenly said we're extending our law everywhere. We're completely taking over. No more Jordans here at all. No more Jordanians. No more Jordanian law. No more preventing Jews from praying on the Temple Mount. There would be repercussions, probably very serious repercussions. We should do it anyway. 100%. It is the correct, moral, ethical, logical thing to do. It's the logical thing to do. Why have a country where your law isn't governed by your country? I mean, it's just ridiculous. With regard to Gantz, I don't agree with a lot of his policies. But again, that doesn't matter. A lot of Israeli politicians follow kind of the same guidelines. They don't sway very much to either side. They want to keep the peace. That's the number one thing in Israel mostly. It's a lot of appeasement. We just will keep the status quo. People are mainly quiet, mainly happy, so we won't change anything. With regard to Gantz's policies about Arab building, it's obviously ridiculous. There should be no more construction anywhere until there are full legal Jewish rights, sovereignty in all of the land. Because again, all we're doing is contributing to creating a de facto foreign state within our state. It doesn't even make any sense. All construction of other laws, other entities, people who identify as being under another government should cease immediately. And we should first work on the land laws that are discriminating against Jews. But again, Gantz isn't taking my phone calls right now, so I don't have any sway in that department.
Right. What would you like to see as the priority, given all the issues that you've identified? Not, well, yeah, given the diaspora, and you're saying no, know our history, take a stance, not be silent. Is there a particular issue that you would see us addressing first and foremost?
The education and the apathy issue, to be honest. People are unfortunately too uninvolved. They say, oh, it's a foreign problem, I don't need to know about it, whatever. They maybe don't know, they maybe don't care. That's the biggest issue in and of itself. We need to know, we need to care, we need to be educated, because one moment, one conversation, one interaction could change everything for Jewish people, for Zionism. If you're on a campus, if you're on an international stage, if you're a teacher, if you're a doctor, if you're a lawyer, you have a voice. Your voice could become policy. If you're misinformed, if you're ignorant, if you don't know something, or if you've been educated incorrectly to be malicious against Israel, to not know facts and history, that could be a major problem for future Jewish Israel policy. So we have to be educated. And again, if we're apathetic about it and say, it's not such a big issue, it's 5,000 miles away, we don't need to care about it, then our kids will think that way. Our kids won't care. And the next generation, they won't want to be proud Zionists. They won't want to be Zionists at all. It's up to us right now. I'd say just galvanize yourselves so you can galvanize the next generation, light a fire under your tuchus. And if you don't have to like every aspect of Zionism, you don't have to be involved. If you're super bored by Israeli history, do something else. Learn about Israeli foods, learn about, Israeli dance, learn about the interactions in Israeli politics, whatever. There are so many ways you can educate yourself and get involved and hopefully spread that education. Just stop being apathetic, I would say, is the most important thing.
Okay, well, you just opened can of worms when you said there's many ways to be Zionist. So let me ask you this. You're familiar with the concept, I'm sure, of progressive Zionists. Mm-hmm. And you speak very loud and logically about Judea and Samaria. So how do you feel we should approach or collaborate with progressive Zionists who do not agree that we should have Judea and Samaria? They may support and say they love Israel, but they do not agree that we should have Judea and Samaria. Does Zionism require that we support all of the land?
100%. 100%. We are the children of Zion, as we are called in the Torah. Zion is just another name for Jerusalem. Zionism is intricately and inalienably connected to Jewish identity. Now, whether that makes you uncomfortable or not, it's a fact. Right? So you don't have to be an observant Jew to be a Zionist, but you do have to understand that there's a connection. If you don't like it, it still exists, the connection. So whether you're a Reform, conservative, Orthodox, atheist, whether you don't believe at all, Judaism and Zionism are connected from the ground up. Our inception started at the same moment, 5,000 years ago. Judaism wouldn't be Judaism without our fundamental tenet of Zionism, and Zionism wouldn't exist at all without Judaism. It's one and the same things. As a Jew, we have 613 mitzvot, 613 commandments. More than half of them can only be performed in the land of Israel. That's an inalienable connection that we just can't ignore. The fact is, we pray 3 times a day in the direction of Jerusalem. The fact is, at every Jewish wedding, we step on a glass to commemorate the destruction of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. All these things can't be ignored. Now, progressive Zionism, for the most part, is not religious. I don't know of any progressive Zionism that claims to be Orthodox Jewish and progressive at the same time. I don't think that would work. It's mostly not affiliated religiously, and they're saying, Zionism is cultural, Zionism is modern, Zionism is this and that. It's not. Zionism is 100% connected to the religion of Judaism. Again, Abraham was the first Zionist. He goes way back. He was a little before Theodore Herzl. Modern political Zionism is only an outgrowth, a very modern outgrowth of an age-old indigenous movement of Zionism. And I would say, listen, there are factions of people in every movement, in every religion that are on the fringes, that don't represent the mainstream. And you know, we can show any religion for that example, but in Judaism, there are fringe groups as well. I do not listen to them as an authority on Judaism, and there are fringe groups on Zionism who I do not listen to as an authority on Zionism either. So we need to just be self-aware and discerning when we're getting this information of who's a Zionist and who's not, what their Jewish affiliation is, what isn't. We have to be aware of what's mainstream and what's fringe ideology. Not everyone has the same authority, let's say, to speak on it. That's not to raise our you know, I'm not saying Orthodox Jews are better than anyone else or anything. God forbid, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying there's mainstream and then there are fringe groups. And we have to see where the information is coming from and why it is coming from those sources.
Okay. What do you say to those who say, but aren't the Palestinian Arabs also, I'm saying also, rather than exclusively, indigenous to the land?
People who claim that Palestinians are also indigenous.
Arab Palestinians.
Arab Palestinians. Okay, so I say no, they're not. And this is where the understanding of history is so important, because if you don't know your history, you're going to be talked into a corner very quickly here, right? It could be easily confusing. The language can easily paint you into a corner. Just go over that very quickly. There's a pan-Arab movement that existed for a long, long time, a pan-Arab movement. There was no Palestinian people. The modern Palestinian Arabs come from Yasser Arafat and the PLO in the mid-1960s. That's the advent of the modern day Palestinians. Everyone before that was just Arab. It was just a pan-Arab movement. There was no understanding of Palestinianism. And also the Arab leaders at that time, anytime before the PLO, actually stood up and said Palestinianism, the idea of Palestinians being a separate people from the Arabs, is a Zionist Jewish invention. The Arab leaders stood up and they disavowed it, which is, you know, we have the quote, so I can send it to you. They're in newspaper articles, but we have to understand true history. The only people calling themselves Palestinians, basically from the Roman Empire up until 1948, were Jews. There were no Arabs calling themselves Palestinians. Remember, the Palestinian Post was a Jewish newspaper. The Palestinian Orchestra was a Jewish orchestra. The Palestinian pound was Jewish currency issued by the National Jewish Bank. The Palestinian soccer team wore yellow Magen Davids on their jerseys because all the players were Jewish. It was all the Palestinians before 1948 were all Jews. Then we kind of got rid of that identity because it was a foreign identity that someone else had imposed on us. And we resurrected and reestablished the ancient Israelites and started calling ourselves Israelis again when we had independence. And then in the 1960s, Yasser Arafat came along and said, I have a brilliant idea. I'm going to invent Palestinian Arabs anachronistically, meaning let's pretend they were here a long time ago and we'll put them in here now. So for people who say that they're indigenous, quite frankly, as a fact, they are not. Arabs come from the Arabian Peninsula. Jews come from Judea. Everyone has their own indigenous place that they come from. We come from Israel, and that's the case. We can't sugarcoat it.
Is there ever going to be a government of Israel that uses any other language though than Palestinian? Doesn't seem to matter what party or what religiosity. It's now ingrained in the very language of the country.
Of course it's ingrained, because now the Palestinians do exist. There is a modern Palestinian people. I'm not saying they don't exist. They just don't exist in the way that their government tries to pretend they exist. Their history doesn't exist as such. Their narrative doesn't exist as such, but they exist as a people. I mean, you walk down the street and you meet Palestinians. They're part of a people. It's just they started at a way later time than they say they started. Their history is much different than they claim it is. Their leadership is much different than they claim it is. It's an issue now that we're dealing with. No, we'll never stop using the language of Palestinians within Israel, because now modern day Arab Palestinians do exist. Since Yasser Arafat, they exist. And that's the situation that we have to deal with. That's the reality.
Can you comment, and this may be the last question, but I think several people are interested in how you would see the future in Israel in terms of the land Some of us are very interested in the model that Dr. Mordechai Kedar has proposed, which I'm sure you're aware of, where he talks about statelets, individual city-states, because the Arabs themselves are not friendly with one another, they're tribal. Others talk about different models, and some talk about moving everybody to Jordan. Does Herut have a model or a preference on that issue, on the land issue?
We do not have a universal Herut preference. Actually, we all differ. And that's the beautiful thing about Zionism. We all have our own opinions and different outcomes that we think would be the most successful and most realistic. And we argue about that sometimes. You know, we'll be sitting in the office and three of us will be in the office and we have three different approaches to what we think should be. And we debate with one another. And that's okay, because ultimately, as long as we've all got the same goal in mind, Zionism, Jewish freedom, self-determination, the understanding of Jewish indigeneity in the land, that's all that matters. Everyone can have their own opinion of what the quote unquote solution should be, but I don't think we're going to come to a consensus necessarily, because every model actually has pros and cons, and we can agree that some are good and others are also good and others don't make sense. That's okay. We don't have a universal model. My personal opinion probably differs from yours and probably differs from someone else in your organization, and it sure differs with my family and my friends, but that's okay, because Zionism transcends all of that. So we'll save that and say, let's have another webinar on solutions and go through all of them.
Okay, well, our president and board chair, Anita, would like you to give us your, I guess, elevator pitch around the definition of Zionism. Can you give us your exact wording? What is Zionism?
Sure. Zionism is self-determination, freedom for the Jewish people, as it is inextricably linked with Jewish identity and Jewish history. That's what I would say in one sentence. It is part of Judaism. It is part of an ancient movement. Zionism is the freedom to live, the self-determination of an indigenous people in their homeland. It's very simple. It's a moral movement. It's a civil rights movement. It's an ancient movement, and it's awesome.
It's awesome. We'll go along with that. Well, Lauren, thank you so much. You're an inspiration not only for your generation, but for my generation as well. We may have felt strongly as you did. Some of us never got to express it as well and as actively as you do. So thank you very much for your words, your thoughts, for your passion, and keep up the good work. Everybody that has sent a message in the chat asking if they can get a copy of what you've posted. Yes. The slides and the webinar. Yes.
Sure. Let me just write my email in the chat as well.
Okay. And just so you know, the recording will be posted on our YouTube page and on our website very soon. And I will send it to everybody that's registered along with the slides. Maybe Lauren will renumber her slides so people don't get confused.
Yes. Sorry, you didn't like the 44444?
I did like it. It got everybody's attention. But maybe when we send it out, we'll correct that.
Right.
So thank you, everyone. I want to say that this is part of a series that we're calling Exploring Zionism and Exposing Anti-Zionism. So next week on the 27th at 5 p.m., we will have a presentation by Dr. Renit Clemens, a similarly passionate, an Israeli-American professor who's experienced anti-Semitism in her own community in San Diego, and she wants to talk about how you can actively challenge anti-Semitism when it hits you at home. What can you do at the community level? So it's a continuation of our discussion about how you can be active, be involved, and just don't be silent. Everyone have a good afternoon. Thank you for participating. Take care of yourself, and Lauren, travel home safely.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.